Hey crafty friends, it's Juliana Michaels and welcome back to my channel. Today we're diving into some classic Tim Holtz stamps and stencils featured in the Stampers Anonymous June Curation. This curated collection puts a spotlight on timeless designs with a summer and travel theme. They may not be new, but they might just be new to you, and thanks to that signature Tim Holtz style, they're always in style. In this tutorial, I'll show you how to use distress ink, texture paste, and a few simple mixed media techniques to create a layered, travel-inspired card with tons of visual impact. Whether you're new to mixed media or just looking for an easy way to add depth and interest to your cards, this project is perfect for you. Now let's get into it. For this card, I'm going to be using some stamps and stencils from Tim Holtz and Stampers Anonymous. These are part of the June Curation from Stampers Anonymous with the theme of like summer and travel. So what they've done is gone back and selected some of the older stamps from Tim Holtz just to kind of remind us that they are still available, that they're out there, because there is such amazing art that already exists, and they never retire. None of these stamps ever retire from Stampers Anonymous. So you know, you can go all the way back to this stamp set here that's called Classics #1. And then, you know, the other stamp sets here I've got is Travel Labels, which is CMS 108, and Air Travel, which is CMS 102. The stencil I'm going to be working with is this one here called Treads. And then for the sentiment, I'm going to be using this stamp set that is from THMM 162, and this is one of the mixed media stamp stencil sets that it comes with a stencil with 2 designs and then a stamp set that's photopolymer. So it's a clear stamp set, but still great quality as you would expect from Stampers Anonymous. The mediums I'm going to be working with are Distress Ink and Rustic Wilderness, Stormy Sky, Ice Spruce, and Vintage Photo. And then I've got some archival inks here in Ground Espresso, Black Soot, Peeled Paint, Faded Jeans, and Rustic Wilderness. And then I'm also going to be working with Distress Texture Paste, Black Opaque. The paper I'm going to be working on is Distress Watercolor Cardstock, and I'm going to be working on the smooth side. And again, just my choice because of the different mediums with the inks and paste, that it will handle all of that. So to start with, I'm just going to select these 2 larger images and I'm going to stamp them onto this background here. And I'm going to put a little bit of some temporary adhesive down just to help hold this paper in place. And then just center these. So basically going to use these to just stamp across the background here, kind of create my own background image with those stamps. And I'm just going to stamp those with some Ground Espresso archival ink. All right. You may need to stamp that several times just to get a good impression. And then from here, I'm just going to add some color using the Distress inks. And I'm going to do some ink smushing. And I'm going to ink smush multiple colors at once. I don't do that super often. It's not always my favorite way to do it. I usually like to do one color at a time, but then I just kind of play around a little bit. So I've got the Stormy Sky. I did some Ice Spruce and Rustic Wilderness there. And then I'm just gonna spritz that with some water. Get it to where that ink's kind of beating up pretty good. And now I'm just gonna smush this down into the ink here. And there we go. So I'm going to give that a quick dry, and then we're going to do another smush. So I don't want to smush into that because that's just kind of a combination of things, and it's going to give me a big puddle of color that I'm not really looking for. So I think I would really like to get a little bit more of the Ice Spruce into that area there. So I'm going to kind of smush into that. You can always add a little water if you need. A little more stormy sky there. There we go, and then we'll give that another dry. So you can kind of keep repeating that ink smushing as much as you like. You know, whether you want to do all the colors at once or one at a time. So I'm going to kind of clean up this. And I'm going to do just some ice spruce by itself. I want to get a little bit more intensity with that color here. So I'm going to, there we go. Yeah. Get that here and there a little bit more. There we go. And then just give that a dry. And then once that's dry, I'm going to trim this down to the size I want for my card because I'm going to layer it onto another panel. And then from there, I'm going to just ink the edges with some Vintage Photo distress ink and a blending tool. And that immediately just adds kind of that nice vintage effect with the images and everything. And then if you want to add a little, you know, more interest to this, you can give it a little spritz-a-roo with the distress sprayer. And then give it another dry. That'll just add a little bit of interest to the background, especially on those areas around the edge where you did the Vintage Photo. If you want to get it a little more dramatic, you can just dry off some of those areas and lift some of that ink to get a little more intensity and interest. And then the final thing I'm going to do here for this background is use the stencil with the black texture paste, and I'm going to run the stencil kind of like at a diagonal here, and just thought that would kind of give it a cool effect. And I'm just using a grip sticky mat here to help hold the stencil and the paper in place. And I'm just going to scoop out some of this with my palette knife and just kind of holding it at a little bit of an angle, get it down onto the paper, and then kind of scrape that over the background and through the stencil there. So don't want it real thick. You want to make sure you're not putting on so much that you can't see the stencil design, because if you're getting it that thick, it's going to cause some problems for you possibly. So rub it down, and then you can spread it across and kind of remove any of that. Now, if you want to add it a little thicker in places to give it a little bit more texture or interest, you certainly can. It doesn't have to be smooth, but you just don't want to get it too thick. And then from there, just kind of carefully peel this up. And wash this, of course, and then you can just set this to the side to dry. Also, with the black texture paste and the regular texture paste, the opaque texture paste, you can use your heat tool to dry these and speed up the dry time if you want. But I'm just going to set this to the side to dry while I clean up my stencil, and then I can work on the embellishment for the card. Now for the embellishment, I'm just going to stamp that compass image. And I also know that I want to stamp my sentiment at the same time. So I selected this, start somewhere. And what I'm going to do is, I know I'm going to trim this down into a rectangle. So I'm just going to kind of play around with the positioning here, because I'll have to put that other pad into my stamp platform here to use the photopolymer stamp. So just get everything kind of lined up there first. We can stamp the stamp the compass with some archival ink here. I'm just using black soot. Get a good impression here, so I'm just stamping it a few times since I'm working on watercolor cardstock here as well. And then we'll put that foam pad in there for the sentiment. Stamp that with the archival ink. But you could use any sentiment here. And then we're going to do some ink smooshing here. So I'm going to trim this down though first before we do the ink smooshing. And just like I said, just going to trim this down to a rectangle. So I've got that trimmed down, and now we're going to ink smush this, and this time I'm just using the Stormy Sky. A little bit of that down on my craft mat, spritz that with some water, and we're going to smush this into the ink on my craft mat there. And then we'll give that a dry. The ink is going to pool onto the sides as the paper, because it's going to warp as it gets wet. That's normal. So if you're not happy with that, you can just kind of take a little paper towel and just dab off some of that excess ink if you like. And then once that's dry, we're going to smush that again and just kind of repeat that process. And by drying in between, you're going to continue building up the layers of color, and it's just going to get a little more intense and darker each time. Let's do another little dab here with kind of what's left on my craft mat. If you want to continue repeating this process until you're satisfied with things, you can repeat it more than what I've done here if you like. Got another little dry. And then once that's dry, I'm going to take the Vintage Photo Distress ink, and I'm just going to ink around the edges here, kind of like I did on that background. And then I'm going to take my Distress sprayer and add some more splatters just to give a little bit more interest again. You can see how those splatters just add another level of texture and interest to the background because the water is reacting with that ink and causing it to kind of move and lift a little. And so there is the finished background there. And so I'm going to stamp that compass image a second time. Doesn't need to be the full image because we're just going to fussy cut out that centerpiece. And then before we fussy cut this, I'm also going to ink smush this. And if you wanted to save yourself a little bit of time, you could do all of this at the same time. I wasn't super thinking, so I just want a real light amount of this. I don't want it super dark, so I'm going to go a little less ink on it this time. Gotta dry. Just a little wash of color. There we go. And then once that's dry, you can just take some scissors and fussy cut this image. And then from there, I'm just going to take a little small blending brush and just add a little bit of some Vintage Photo to the edges of this. You just kind of just give it a little bit of a distressed look. And then from there, you just layer it onto your background using some foam adhesive. And then for the center, I took one of the Ideology hardware heads, the larger ones, and just inked it with some alcohol ink in espresso and mushroom, just to age it a little bit, and then adhered that with some glossy accents, and then layered the different panels onto some black cardstock and popped up this centerpiece with some double-sided foam tape just to give it a little bit more dimension. And then the other component for this card is I took the travel labels stamp set and I stamped several of the labels onto white cardstock using archival ink. So I stamped one of each color in Faded Jeans, Peeled Paint, and Rustic Wilderness. And then I inked the edges with the Vintage Photo Distress ink. And then I layered them onto the card and just trimmed them. So like this kind of brown one here, I just adhered it, trimmed it off, and then put the other piece over here. And then I just put part of this one there, and then this part of one there as just another layer of interest on the background. But you could totally leave that off if you wanted to, and you know, just use the background as is without those. I hope you enjoyed this vintage travel-inspired mixed media card featuring some Tim Holtz classics from the Stampers Anonymous June Curation. You can find links to all of the products I used in today's video in the YouTube description box. There is also a visual supply list that you can click on to see all the supplies I used, and feel free to check out my blog post for photos and more information. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more crafty inspiration, tutorials, and technique ideas. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss a video. And here's another video that you might be interested in checking out. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, stay crafty, my friend.